Hey guys, tonight we're walking into the coldest inhabited place on Earth, Yakutia, Siberia, where the air itself can kill you in minutes and the locals casually stroll through temperatures that would make Antarctica jealous. Picture this, you're standing at the edge of a forest so vast it could swallow entire countries, where the thermometer just hit minus 71 degrees Celsius, your eyelashes have frozen into tiny icicle clusters, and that weird crackling sound? That's your breath freezing before it even leaves your face. The trees around you look like they've been dipped in white crystal, their branches heavy with frost so thick it resembles fur, and somewhere in the distance, you hear the haunting crack of a tree trunk splitting open from the cold, a sound the locals call the whisper of the frost devil. You're about to spend the next several hours walking alone through this frozen cathedral of larch and pine, and honestly, you probably won't survive this. But let's pretend you will, because that's more fun, and because the Saka people, the indigenous inhabitants of this frozen nightmare, have been doing exactly this for thousands of years. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love knowing that someone in Miami is falling asleep to tales of minus 70 degrees Celsius while wrapped in their air-conditioned blanket cocoon. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've been preparing for this walk for weeks, but nothing truly prepares you for the moment you step outside. The cold doesn't just touch your skin. It assaults every exposed millimeter with the fury of 1,000 tiny knives. Within 3 seconds, the moisture inside your nostrils freezes solid, creating this bizarre sensation like someone stuffed your nose with crispy rice paper. You instinctively try to breathe through your mouth, but that's arguably worse. The cold air rushes down your throat like you're swallowing shards of glass made from frozen starlight. Your teeth ache, your lungs spasm slightly, protesting this atmospheric assault that feels less like weather and more like the universe's personal vendetta against mammalian life. Welcome to Yakutia, officially the Saka Republic, a chunk of Siberia roughly the size of India but with a population smaller than Manhattan's. This place holds the record for the coldest permanently inhabited settlement on Earth, the village of Oymyakon, where they once recorded minus 71.2 degrees Celsius back in 1926, though locals insist it's gotten colder since then, but their thermometers literally can't measure it because the alcohol inside freezes solid. The Russian word for this kind of cold is zelyezny, which translates roughly to made of iron. Because at these temperatures, exposed metal will freeze bond to your skin instantly, steel becomes brittle as glass, and even the hardiest machinery throws in the towel and refuses to operate. You're wearing layers, so many layers that you've essentially transformed yourself into a human-shaped marshmallow. But we'll get into the specifics of those layers later. For now, you're standing at the threshold between the small heated cabin where you've spent the last hour psyching yourself up and the white infinity of the taiga forest stretching before you. The Saka people call this forest taiga, and it's the world's largest biome. A green lung in summer that becomes a white ghost in winter. You can see your destination, sort of a thin trail of disturbed snow that winds between the larch trees and disappears into the blue-white haze about 50 meters ahead. The door behind you closes with a thunk that sounds muffled and strange. Sound travels differently in extreme cold. The air is so dense and dry that noises don't carry the way they do in normal temperatures. Everything feels close, intimate, compressed. You take your first step forward, and your boot. A traditional Saka design made from reindeer fur with the hair facing outward, compresses the snow beneath you with a squeak that's almost musical. The snow here isn't like snow in other places. At minus 71 degrees Celsius, it's not really snow anymore. It's more like styrofoam, or sand, or crushed diamonds. It doesn't pack. It doesn't melt under pressure. It just squeaks and crunches with this distinctive sound that Arctic explorers throughout history have described as singing snow. Your first few breaths are the hardest. You're breathing through a thick scarf wrapped around your face. Wool on the inside, fur on the outside, and it's already starting to accumulate ice from your breath's moisture. This is one of the critical challenges of extreme cold. Your own body becomes your enemy. Every breath you exhale contains water vapor, and that vapor freezes instantly when it hits the minus 71 degrees Celsius air, but it also freezes onto whatever's covering your mouth. By the end of this walk, Your scarf will have accumulated so much ice that it'll weigh an extra 2 or 3 kilograms and will have frozen into a stiff, uncomfortable mask against your face. But the alternative, walking without face protection, would result in frostbite to your lips, nose, and cheeks within 3 to 5 minutes. So you accept the slowly accumulating ice mask as the lesser evil, which pretty much sums up all of survival in Yakutia, choosing between various forms of misery and picking the least deadly option. You start walking. The trail ahead is visible but not obvious. Just a slight depression in the otherwise uniform blanket of snow that covers everything. To your left and right, the larch trees stand like silent sentinels. Larch is the dominant tree here, and it's the only conifer that drops its needles in winter, which gives the forest this eerie, skeletal appearance. The trees are frosted with what's called kwairak in Saka, a thick coating of frost that forms when the air is so cold that moisture freezes directly onto surfaces without ever becoming liquid first. This is called deposition in physics, the opposite of sublimation, and it creates these absolutely breathtaking crystalline formations that make every tree look like it's been dipped in powdered sugar and then frozen in time. The light is strange. It's mid-morning, theoretically, but in January this far north, morning is a generous term. The sun barely climbs above the horizon, creating this perpetual twilight that bathes everything in shades of blue and violet. The shadows are long and dramatic, stretching across the snow like dark fingers. The sky above is a pale, almost greenish blue, a color you've never seen anywhere else, a color that doesn't exist in normal climates. It's beautiful in a hostile, alien way, like you're walking across the surface of a planet that was never meant to host human life. Here's something that would blow the mind of anyone living in a temperate climate. At these temperatures, you can actually see your breath freeze. Not just see the vapor, but watch it crystallize in real time. When you exhale, a cloud of white mist appears. Nothing unusual there. But then, before it dissipates, tiny ice crystals form within the cloud and begin to fall, creating this shower of microscopic snow that sparkles in the weak sunlight. The Saka people call this breath stars, and children are taught to watch for them because they're an indicator that you're breathing correctly, slowly and shallowly enough that you're not supercooling your lungs too rapidly. You've walked maybe 100 meters now, and already you're learning the rhythm of extreme cold walking. It's nothing like normal hiking. Every movement has to be deliberate, calculated. You can't rush. Rushing makes you sweat, and sweat in minus 71 degrees Celsius is a death sentence. The moisture will freeze in your clothing layers, creating bridges of ice that conduct heat away from your body at an exponentially faster rate. The Saka have a saying, "The fast walker feeds the frost." So you move slowly, steadily, keeping your breathing shallow and controlled, periodically checking your fingers and toes for that telltale tingling that indicates the beginning of frostbite. The silence is profound. In normal forests, there's always sound. Wind rustling leaves, birds calling, insects buzzing. Here there's nothing. The cold has driven every creature either deep underground, into hibernation, or south to more hospitable climates. The wind is calm today, thankfully. Wind at these temperatures turns cold from merely deadly to absolutely apocalyptic. Even a light 5 km/h breeze would drive the wind chill down to temperatures that would freeze exposed skin in under a minute. But today, the air is still, which is why you're walking today instead of huddling inside and waiting for better conditions. You pass a tree that's split down the middle, the wood inside exposed and white. This is a common sight in Yakutian winter, trees exploding from the cold. It happens when the sap inside the tree freezes and expands, creating internal pressure that the wood can't contain. The crack is startlingly loud when it happens, like a gunshot echoing through the forest, and it's one of the few sounds that breaks the winter silence. Some historians argue whether these frost cracks were the origin of certain Saka myths about forest spirits that scream in the night, while others insist the myths predated the Saka people's migration to this region and refer to something else entirely. Either way, a forest full of exploding trees feels appropriately mythological. Your hands are starting to ache inside your mittens, not from cold, but from the opposite. You're wearing traditional Saka mittens, which are actually 3 layers: a thin silk liner, a thick wool middle layer, and an outer shell made from reindeer fur. Your hands are almost too warm, which sounds like a ridiculous complaint but is actually a delicate problem. Too warm means sweating, and sweating means moisture, and moisture means ice. You're learning to regulate your body temperature through subtle adjustments, opening or closing your outer coat, adjusting your pace, even controlling your breathing rhythm. The human body generates a shocking amount of heat, roughly 100 watts at rest, more like 400 to 500 watts during exercise. Managing that heat output in minus 71 degrees Celsius is like trying to balance a chemical equation while the lab is on fire. Ahead, you spot something that makes your heart skip. A set of tracks crossing your path. They're fresh, possibly from this morning, and they belong to something big. The prints are circular, about 10 centimeters across and spaced far apart. Wolf, probably. The Yakutian wolf is a particularly hardy subspecies, larger than its southern cousins, with fur so thick that it can sleep comfortably in minus 50 degrees Celsius without any shelter. Historians still argue whether the Saka people's ancient alliance with wolves, they rarely hunted them and incorporated wolf imagery into their spiritual practices, was born from practical respect for a fellow survivor of this landscape or from older shamanistic traditions brought from their ancestral homeland further south. The tracks continue into the forest perpendicular to your path, and you feel both relieved that it's not following your trail and vaguely concerned that there's a wolf somewhere nearby that's comfortable hunting in these temperatures. You've been walking for perhaps 20 minutes now, though checking your watch is complicated by the multiple layers of clothing. Time feels strange here anyway, stretched out and compressed simultaneously. The unchanging twilight makes it impossible to judge time by sun position. Your body's circadian rhythms are confused by the near-constant darkness of winter this far north. The Saka people developed complex methods for tracking time before mechanical clocks, using the movement of certain stars, the feeding patterns of animals, even the different sounds that ice makes as it freezes at different depths in the river. There's a whole vocabulary in the Saka language for different types of cold and different stages of winter darkness that simply don't exist in other languages because they're not needed anywhere else. The cold is starting to feel less shocking now, more like a constant pressure against your entire body. Your face beneath the scarf has gone numb, which should probably concern you more than it does. You're entering that strange mental state that happens in extreme conditions, a kind of focused calm where your consciousness narrows to immediate survival concerns and everything else fades away. Psychologists call this attentional narrowing, and it's probably an evolutionary adaptation to crisis situations. But it feels almost meditative, peaceful even, this reduction of existence to basic elements. Cold, movement, breath, the crunch of snow beneath your boots. You're maybe a third of the way through your planned route now, and the forest has closed in around you. The larch trees are denser here, their frost-covered branches creating a tunnel of white that stretches ahead into the blue distance. Your face scarf is definitely heavier with accumulated ice. You can feel it pulling against your neck. Your eyelashes have frozen together twice, requiring you to stop and carefully warm them with your mitt-covered hand pressed gently against your eyelids. This is normal. This is fine. This is minus 71 degrees Celsius in Yakutia, where normal and fine are relative terms that would make people from warmer climates question your sanity. But you're walking. You're surviving. You're experiencing something that 99.999% of humans throughout history have never experienced and will never experience. And somewhere in the back of your mind, beneath the cold-induced focus, you're aware that this is weirdly, impossibly, beautifully magnificent. This frozen world where the air sparkles and the trees explode and your breath becomes snow before it can disappear. The trail curves ahead, winding deeper into the white cathedral of frost and silence. You follow it, one careful step at a time, breathing shallowly through your ice-crusted scarf, very much alive in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. The cold isn't just uncomfortable, it's rewriting the fundamental rules of physics around you, turning familiar materials into alien substances and making your body work overtime just to maintain the basic functions that you normally take completely for granted. You're about 45 minutes into your walk now, and you're starting to notice the weird ways that extreme cold transforms reality itself. That water bottle you brought? Frozen solid, despite being wrapped in insulating material and tucked inside your innermost coat layer against your body. The metal zipper on your outer jacket? Touch it with bare skin for even 2 seconds and you'll leave a layer of flesh behind. The rubber on your boot soles? Hard as plastic, having lost all flexibility below minus 40 degrees Celsius. which means your grip on icy surfaces is significantly worse than it would be in merely very cold temperatures. At -71 degrees Celsius, you're essentially walking through a different state of matter than what humans evolved to inhabit. The air itself has become soup-thick with density, cold air is heavier than warm air, and at these temperatures, every breath feels like you're inhaling liquid. Your lungs are working harder than normal just to extract oxygen from this dense, frozen atmosphere. Each inhalation requires more muscular effort, and your diaphragm is already starting to feel fatigued, like you've been doing a low-intensity workout for the past hour. Which, in a sense, your body is burning calories at roughly 3 times its normal rate just to maintain core temperature, making this gentle walk through the forest equivalent to a moderate jog in terms of energy expenditure. Here's something delightfully weird: the physics of sound at extreme cold. You noticed earlier that sounds seem compressed and intimate, but there's actual science behind that sensation. Cold air doesn't just feel different, it literally carries sound waves differently than warm air. Sound travels through air by creating pressure waves, and those waves move faster through warm, less dense air and slower through cold, dense air. At -71 degrees Celsius, sound is traveling roughly 20% slower than it would at room temperature, which creates the subtle but perceptible delay between what you see and what you hear. When you step on a stick and it cracks beneath your boot, there's a microscopic lag between the visual of the stick breaking and the audio of the crack reaching your ears. Your brain usually synchronizes these automatically, but at extreme cold, the lag is just long enough to create this uncanny valley feeling, like you're watching a movie where the audio track is slightly out of sync. Temperature also affects how far sound travels. In normal conditions, sound dissipates as it moves through air, absorbed by moisture and scattered by thermal turbulence. But here, in this bone-dry, thermally stable environment, sound can travel absurdly far before fading. The Saka people have stories of being able to hear conversations from kilometers away on particularly cold, still days. Voices floating across the frozen landscape like ghosts. Modern acousticians have confirmed this isn't myth but physics. In optimal cold air conditions, human voices can carry 3 to 4 times farther than they would in temperate climates. Which means if you screamed right now, someone 3 kilometers away might hear you perfectly clearly. This is both comforting from a safety perspective and deeply unsettling from an existential one. Your eyes are watering, which is a problem. The tears freeze almost instantly on your cheeks, creating tiny ice tracks down your face inside your scarf covering. Human tears are mostly water with a bit of salt and protein, and they freeze at around -2 degrees Celsius, much warmer than your surrounding environment. The moisture stings as it freezes, creating these odd, itchy sensations along your cheekbones. You're learning to suppress the watering reflex, which your eyes are triggering because they're interpreting the extreme cold as an irritant similar to dust or smoke. But the tears themselves are counterproductive, creating more moisture that just freezes and makes everything worse. It's another one of those situations where your body's automatic protective responses are actually maladaptive for these conditions. Evolution simply didn't prepare humans for voluntarily walking through -71 degrees Celsius. The thermodynamics of your clothing system are fascinating if you're nerdy enough to think about them while walking, which you are because what else is there to do out here? Your body is generating heat through metabolism, burning calories to maintain your core temperature at 37 degrees Celsius. That heat is trying desperately to escape through radiation, conduction, convection, and evaporation. Your clothing layers are designed to trap that heat close to your body while simultaneously allowing moisture vapor to escape. It's a delicate balance. Too much insulation and you overheat and sweat. Too little and you freeze. The ideal system creates what clothing scientists call a microclimate, a thin layer of warm, slightly humid air trapped against your skin, maintained at around 28 to 32 degrees Celsius, comfortable enough that your body doesn't have to work too hard to maintain it, but not so warm that you start sweating. Right now, your microclimate is holding steady, which means your clothing system is working correctly. But it's working against a temperature gradient of over 100 degrees Celsius, the difference between your skin temperature and the ambient air. That's a bigger gradient than most engineering systems are designed to handle. The insulating properties of your fur and wool layers rely on trapping thousands of tiny air pockets within the fibers. Still air is an excellent insulator, It has a thermal conductivity of only 0.024 W/mK, which is technical speak for really bad at conducting heat. But if those air pockets collapse, from compression, moisture, or movement, then suddenly your insulation value drops dramatically and the cold starts winning. You stop for a moment to adjust your scarf, and even this brief pause creates problems. When you're moving, your body generates more heat. When you stop, that heat generation drops, but your blood is still being pumped to your extremities at the elevated rate necessary for walking. The result is that your fingers and toes start cooling rapidly within about 30 seconds of stopping. The Saka people have a rule: never stop moving unless you're building a fire. 5 minutes of standing still in minus 71 degrees Celsius can be enough to cause frostbite in your toes even inside insulated boots, because your feet are the farthest from your heart, receive less blood flow, and are in direct contact with the frozen ground through your boot soles. So you adjust your scarf quickly, brushing away some of the accumulated ice, rewrapping the frozen fabric around your face, and start moving again within 20 seconds. The light continues to be surreal. It's brighter now than it was an hour ago, which means the sun has climbed a few degrees higher in its shallow arc across the southern sky. But brighter is relative. It's still dimmer than an overcast day in London or Seattle. The quality of light is what's remarkable. Everything glows. The snow reflects what little light there is with remarkable efficiency. Fresh snow can reflect 80 to 90% of incoming sunlight, which is why snow blindness is a real danger even in these dim conditions. The Saka traditionally dealt with this by wearing wooden snow goggles carved with narrow horizontal slits that limited the amount of light entering the eyes while still allowing enough vision to navigate. You're wearing modern polarized sunglasses, which feel ridiculous given how dark it is but are actually necessary to prevent the cumulative UV damage from the reflected light. Your breath ice is falling around you in a constant sparkle shower. At these temperatures, every exhalation becomes a small weather event. The moisture in your breath condenses, freezes, and precipitates in the space of about 2 seconds. Scientists call this ice fog or poganip, though the Yakutian version is particularly spectacular because the temperatures are so extreme. Each tiny ice crystal catches and refracts the available light, creating miniature rainbows that flash and disappear in the space between heartbeats. It's beautiful enough that you occasionally forget you're essentially creating a visible marker of biological desperation. Your body expelling moisture it can't afford to lose into an environment that instantly weaponizes it against you. Here's a cheerful thought. Your body is now in mild hypothermia. Not dangerous hypothermia, not the kind where you need immediate medical intervention, but your core temperature has probably dropped from its normal 37 degrees Celsius to something closer to 36 degrees Celsius. This is actually expected and manageable. Your body has diverted blood flow away from your extremities and skin to protect your vital organs, creating a natural insulating layer of cooler flesh between your core and the environment. Your fingers and toes are probably sitting at around 20 to 25 degrees Celsius right now, which sounds dangerously cold but is actually fine as long as the temperature doesn't drop further. The real danger zone for frostbite begins when tissue temperature drops below 0 degrees Celsius and ice crystals start forming between cells. You're nowhere near that threshold yet, but you're having to actively manage it through movement and awareness. Historians still argue whether the Saka people's legendary cold tolerance is purely cultural adaptation or whether there's been actual genetic selection over the centuries for traits that help survive extreme cold. Some studies have suggested that populations native to extreme cold climates show differences in brown fat distribution, metabolic rate, and peripheral blood flow compared to populations from warmer regions. But the debate continues because it's difficult to separate genuine genetic adaptation from learned behavioral adaptation and childhood conditioning. What's undeniable is that Saka children playing outside in minus 50 degrees Celsius, barely dressed by Western standards, while laughing and building snow fortresses, suggests something significant happening beyond just, they're tough. You're passing through a section of forest where the trees are younger and smaller, probably regrowth from a fire that swept through here maybe 20 or 30 years ago. Forest fires in Yakutia are common in summer, when lightning ignites the tinder-dry taiga, and they can burn for months across hundreds of thousands of hectares. The scars remain visible for decades afterward. These young larch trees are only 3 or 4 meters tall, and their branches are heavily laden with frost in a way that the taller, older trees aren't. This creates a tunnel of white lace overhead, like you're walking through a wedding arch designed by a particularly ambitious frost giant with too much time and a flair for the dramatic. The snow depth here is greater than on the main trail, maybe 1.5 meters of accumulated snowfall over the course of the winter so far. You're grateful for the packed trail. Breaking through virgin snow at these depths would be exhausting and potentially dangerous. Each step would require lifting your entire leg up and out of the snow, burning energy you can't spare, and potentially working up enough sweat to compromise your insulation. The Saka traditionally dealt with deep snow using snowshoes, broad frames woven from willow and rawhide that distributed weight and let you essentially float on the snow's surface. Modern snowshoes use aluminum and synthetic materials but operate on the same principle. Increase surface area, decrease pressure per square centimeter, stay on top instead of sinking through. Something moves at the edge of your vision. You freeze, scanning the tree line to your right. There, a flicker of brown against white. Your heart rate spikes, pumping adrenaline into your system, warming you slightly from the inside. The shape resolves into a reindeer, or rather a caribou in North American terminology, though the Saka call them taba. It's standing perfectly still about 50 meters away, watching you with dark, liquid eyes that look impossibly large in its frost-covered face. Its breath creates huge clouds of vapor that freeze and fall around it like a personal snow machine. The animal seems utterly unbothered by the temperature, which makes sense. Reindeer have hollow guard hairs that trap air for insulation and a countercurrent heat exchange system in their legs that prevents heat loss to the frozen ground. They're so well adapted to cold that they actually start experiencing heat stress at temperatures above 10 degrees Celsius. The reindeer regards you for perhaps 15 seconds, then turns and walks away with unhurried dignity, disappearing into the forest with barely a sound. You feel oddly honored by the encounter, like you've been assessed by a local and found sufficiently non-threatening to ignore. Reindeer have been central to Saka culture for millennia, providing food, clothing, transportation, and even housing materials from their hides. The relationship between the Saka people and their reindeer herds is so deep that there are over 40 words in the Saka language for different types of reindeer categorized by age, sex, coloring, temperament, and intended use. A language develops that kind of specificity only when the subject is absolutely central to survival. Your scarf is now genuinely heavy with ice, probably adding 2 kilograms to your head. The ice has formed in layers, each exhalation adding a new microscopic stratum of frozen moisture. If you took the scarf off and examined it under a microscope, you could probably read the last hour of your breathing pattern in the ice layers, like tree rings recording seasons of growth. But you're not taking the scarf off because exposing your face to minus 71 degrees Celsius even for the 30 seconds it would take to examine your ice scarf would be monumentally stupid. So you just accept the increasing weight and the way the frozen fabric chafes against your cheeks and chin, another minor discomfort in the portfolio of minor discomforts that constitute walking in extreme cold. The battery in your phone died about 20 minutes ago. Lithium-ion batteries suffer catastrophic performance loss in extreme cold. Their chemical reactions slow down dramatically, and their effective capacity can drop to 20% or less of their rated capacity. You knew this would happen, which is why you brought your phone primarily as a backup camera in a waterproof case tucked inside your innermost layer, and why you're navigating by landmark memorization and trail following rather than GPS. The Saka navigated this landscape for thousands of years without electronics, using the stars, the angle of snowdrifts, the types of trees and their growth patterns, even the taste of different snows to determine direction and location. That knowledge is increasingly rare now, replaced by GPS and satellite phones. But there are still elders who can navigate hundreds of kilometers of white wilderness using nothing but observation and memory. You're roughly 2/3 through your planned walk now, and your body is starting to send different signals. Fatigue is settling in, not the muscle exhaustion of hard exercise, but the deep, systemic tiredness of extended cold exposure. Your body has been working overtime for over an hour, and it's burning through calories at an incredible rate. Before you left, you ate a massive breakfast: reindeer meat, fermented mare's milk, thick bread with butter, and sweetened tea, consuming probably 1,500 calories to fuel this expedition. You're likely burning through about 800 to 1,000 calories per hour out here, which means you're already running a significant caloric deficit. Hunger is starting to gnaw at your belly, a hollow feeling that's partly genuine need and partly your body's panic response to extended cold exposure. The forest opens up ahead, and you can see a frozen stream cutting through the landscape. The ice is thick, at least 2 meters thick, probably more. Opaque white except where wind has blown the snow away to reveal patches of clear blue ice underneath. Walking across frozen rivers is always slightly nerve-wracking, even when you know intellectually that ice this thick could support a truck. There's something primal about crossing frozen water, an instinctive wariness that's probably evolutionarily useful given how deadly it is to break through ice into freezing water. But the ice here has been solid since October and won't thaw until May. It's more solid than most rock, harder than concrete, and absolutely trustworthy. You step onto it without hesitation, your boots squeaking across the wind-polished surface. The cold has achieved a kind of equilibrium with your body now. You're no longer being shocked by it every moment. Instead, it's become your baseline, a constant, manageable pressure that you've learned to work within. This is probably the most dangerous phase of cold exposure, when the novelty has worn off and complacency can creep in. This is when people make mistakes, when they stop checking their extremities for frostbite, when they forget to keep moving and stand still just a little too long. The Saka have another saying, "The cold forgives nothing, not even forgetfulness." So you stay vigilant, stay focused, even as the cold becomes familiar. The secret to surviving Yakutian cold isn't just one brilliant invention or technique. It's a comprehensive system of layering, material selection, and wearing strategies developed over thousands of years through trial, error, and presumably quite a few frozen ancestors who learned important lessons the hard way. You're currently wrapped in what amounts to a wearable ecosystem, each layer performing a specific function in the complex dance of keeping your core temperature stable while allowing enough mobility to actually move. Let's talk about what you're wearing, because understanding your clothing is understanding the difference between life and death in -71 degrees Celsius. Starting from your skin outward, because that's how the Saka think about it. Inside to outside, core to extremity, warmth radiating outward through progressively protective barriers. Your first layer, the one touching your actual skin, is silk. Yes, silk. This surprises most people who assume you'd want thick wool or synthetic fleece against your skin. But silk is actually ideal for extreme cold base layers. It's smooth enough that it doesn't irritate skin during extended wear. It wicks moisture away from your body efficiently. And here's the critical part, it dries quickly. Any moisture that does accumulate in your base layer needs to move away from your skin and either evaporate or migrate outward to layers where it can freeze without affecting your core temperature. Silk accomplishes this better than almost any other natural fiber. The Saka traded for silk along the ancient Silk Road route centuries ago and immediately recognized its value for winter survival. Over the silk, you're wearing a layer of wool, thick, slightly scratchy. Traditional Saka wool that's been hand-carded and hand-spun from local sheep breeds that have themselves adapted to extreme cold over centuries. This wool hasn't been processed much beyond cleaning and spinning. It retains much of its natural lanolin, which makes it slightly water-resistant and helps it maintain its insulating properties even when damp. The wool layer is loose-fitting, creating air pockets that trap warmth. Those air pockets are the real insulation. The wool fibers themselves just create the structure that keeps the air from moving around and carrying heat away through convection. This is why compressed wool insulates poorly. You've eliminated the air pockets that did the actual work. Your third layer is where things get really interesting. You're wearing a deal, a traditional Saka garment that's essentially a long coat with a thick, quilted interior, made from reindeer hide with the hair left on and facing inward. Reindeer hair is hollow, which makes it extraordinarily light and extraordinarily insulating. Each hair is essentially a tiny thermos, trapping still air inside its hollow core. When you have thousands of these hairs pressing against your wool layer, you're adding an insulation value that's hard to match with modern synthetic materials. The deal wraps around your body and ties closed on the side rather than the front, which eliminates a cold line down your center where heat could escape. The Saka perfected this asymmetric closure design centuries ago. You'd be amazed how much heat leaks through a traditional front-closing coat in extreme cold. Over the deal, you're wearing a wind layer, a long jacket made from tightly woven canvas that's been treated with fish oil to make it wind and moisture resistant. This is your shell, your barrier against the slight breezes that occasionally move through the forest. Wind is the killer in extreme cold, because it disrupts the boundary layer of slightly warmed air that surrounds your body and accelerates heat loss through convection. Even a 5 km/h wind can drop the effective temperature by 10 degrees or more. Your wind layer doesn't need to insulate, that's what the inner layers do. It just needs to keep the air still around your body so those inner layers can do their job. The fish oil treatment gives the canvas a slight sheen and a distinctive smell that you've mostly stopped noticing. Though when you first put it on this morning, you definitely caught a whiff of what can only be described as ancient maritime commerce. Now let's talk about your extremities, because fingers and toes are where most cold injuries occur. Your hands are wrapped in the 3-layer mitten system mentioned earlier: silk liner, wool middle, reindeer fur outer, but there's a subtlety to this setup that isn't immediately obvious. The mittens are enormous, much larger than your hands actually need. This is intentional. Inside those mittens, your fingers aren't separate. You're making fists with your thumb tucked against your palm. This configuration minimizes surface area and maximizes warmth. Keeping your fingers separated in individual glove fingers looks more practical but actually increases heat loss by exposing more surface area to cold and reducing the fingers' ability to share warmth with each other. The Saka learned centuries ago that mittens beat gloves in extreme cold, and that oversized mittens beat fitted ones. But here's the clever part. Your mittens are attached to long sleeves that extend from the mitten up past your elbows, and these sleeves are tied around your upper arms with leather thongs. This creates a sealed environment for your entire arm, preventing cold air from sneaking in through the gap between your coat sleeve and your mitten. Cold air is sneaky. It finds every opening, every gap, every unsealed junction between garments. Traditional Saka clothing is designed with this in mind, creating overlapping, sealed systems that force cold air to work much harder to reach your skin. Some historians still argue whether this obsessive attention to garment sealing was independently developed by the Saka or borrowed from even earlier Arctic peoples. But the end result is a clothing system that's remarkably sophisticated from an engineering perspective. Your feet are equally well protected. You're wearing 3 layers of socks, silk, wool, and then a thick felt inner bootie, all inside traditional Saka winter boots called unti. These boots are masterpieces of cold weather design. The sole is made from reindeer leg skin, which is naturally tough and stays flexible in cold better than most materials. The upper boot is sewn from reindeer fur with the hair facing outward, which looks beautiful but also serves a practical purpose. Frost accumulates on the outer hair rather than against the boot structure itself, and you can simply brush it off periodically. The boots come up to just below your knees and are tied around your calves with leather strips, again creating that sealed environment that prevents cold air infiltration. Inside your boots, you've also placed dried grass, specifically a type of sedge grass that the Saka call otut. This grass is collected in late summer, dried thoroughly, and then stuffed into boots as additional insulation. It sounds primitive, maybe even silly, but dried grass has an impressive insulation value and has the added benefit of absorbing moisture. Your feet, despite being wrapped in multiple sock layers, are still producing some sweat. You're exercising moderately after all, and that moisture needs to go somewhere. The dried grass absorbs it, keeping your socks drier and preventing the moisture from freezing against your skin. At night, you'll remove the grass, hang it up to dry, and replace it with fresh grass the next day. It's a maintenance ritual that takes about 5 minutes, but dramatically extends your ability to keep walking day after day without developing frostbite or trench foot. Your head covering is its own complex system. Under your fur hat, you're wearing a wool balaclava that covers your entire head, neck, and upper shoulders with just a small opening for your eyes and nose. Over that goes a traditional Saka hat made from fox fur, red fox specifically, which has particularly dense, warm fur even by Arctic fox standards. The hat has your flaps that fold down and tie under your chin, and a wide brim that helps shield your face from any wind. The crown of the hat is peaked and slightly domed, which helps shed snow and prevents the accumulation of frost. Your entire head system probably weighs 2 kilograms, but that weight is distributed across your skull and shoulders so it doesn't feel too burdensome. The scarf around your face is also more complicated than it first appears. It's not just wrapped randomly. There's a specific technique the Saka use that positions the thickest part of the scarf directly in front of your mouth and nose, where most moisture will accumulate, while thinner sections cover your cheeks and chin. The scarf is secured by being tucked into your outer jacket collar in a way that creates a slight gap for air exchange but prevents the scarf from unwrapping even if you turn your head vigorously. As you've already noticed, the scarf accumulates ice, but the way it's wrapped means the ice forms on the outer surface rather than against your skin, and the multiple layers of fabric between the ice and your face provide enough insulation that you're not putting frozen material directly against your cheeks. What's remarkable about this entire clothing system is how it addresses the moisture problem, arguably the biggest challenge of extreme cold clothing design. Your body is constantly producing moisture through respiration and perspiration. In temperate climates, this moisture evaporates into the air or is absorbed by clothing and then evaporates later. In -71 degrees Celsius, moisture doesn't evaporate, it freezes. If it freezes in the wrong place, like between your base layer and your skin, it can create a bridge for heat loss that dramatically accelerates hypothermia. The Saka clothing system manages moisture through a combination of absorption, the dried grass, the wool layers, migration, the silk base layer pulling moisture away from skin, and freezing in intentional zones like on your face scarf, where the ice can be managed or removed. Modern synthetic materials have tried to replicate what traditional Saka clothing accomplishes naturally, with mixed results. Gore-Tex and similar breathable waterproof membranes work beautifully in temperatures down to maybe -20 degrees Celsius, but at extreme cold, they often fail because the moisture freezes in the membrane itself, blocking the tiny pores that allow vapor to escape while keeping liquid water out. High-tech synthetic insulations like Primaloft or Thinsulate can match or exceed the warmth-to-weight ratio of natural fur, but they're less durable, more expensive, and don't handle moisture as gracefully. There's been a resurgence of interest in traditional Arctic clothing systems among serious polar explorers who've learned through expensive experience that the Saka and Inuit peoples figured this out centuries ago. The weight of your clothing is substantial. You're carrying roughly 15 kilograms of fabric, fur, and leather on your body right now. In warm weather, this would be unbearable, like hiking with a heavy backpack strapped to your entire body. But in extreme cold, the weight is distributed across your frame in a way that feels manageable, and the bulk actually helps with warmth by creating more air pockets and more buffer between your core and the environment. The Saka say that winter clothes should feel like a house you carry with you, which perfectly captures the sensation. You're not wearing clothes in the normal sense, you're inhabiting a mobile shelter system that happens to be made from textiles and fur. There's also a psychological component to traditional Saka winter clothing that's harder to quantify but very real. When you're wrapped in layers of fur and wool, following clothing traditions that are centuries or millennia old, you feel connected to every person who survived Yakutian winter before you. You're not alone in your struggle against the cold. You're part of an unbroken chain of human stubbornness and ingenuity stretching back through generations. That's weirdly comforting when you're walking alone through a frozen forest at temperatures that could kill you within hours if your clothing system failed. You're wearing history, wearing accumulated wisdom, wearing proof that humans can adapt to almost anything if they're creative and careful enough. Your clothing also broadcasts information to anyone who might see you. The style and quality of your garments indicate your level of preparation and experience. Someone wearing proper traditional Saka cold gear isn't a clueless outsider. They're someone who's done their homework, respected local knowledge, and taken cold survival seriously. In a place where people die from insufficient preparation with depressing regularity, this kind of visual assessment can be important. The Saka can often tell at a glance whether someone will survive their planned journey based solely on their clothing choices, which has led to an interesting cultural practice of elders stopping poorly dressed travelers and refusing to let them continue until they've added appropriate layers. The maintenance of cold weather clothing is its own time-consuming process. You can't just throw Saka winter gear in a washing machine. Each component needs specific care. The furs need to be brushed regularly to maintain their loft, cleaned with snow rather than water to prevent ice formation in the hide, and stored carefully in summer to prevent insect damage. The wool needs to be aired out frequently and cleaned with mild soap, and the boots need their waterproofing renewed periodically with fresh fish oil or seal fat. A full set of traditional Saka winter clothing represents hundreds of hours of labor in construction and ongoing maintenance, which is why such outfits are often family heirlooms passed down through generations. Each piece repaired and modified over decades of use until almost none of the original material remains but the essential design persists. You adjust one of your mittens, feeling the weight and thickness of all these layers between your hand and the environment. Through the silk, wool, and fur, you can barely feel your own fingers, but you know they're warm, pink, alive. That's the whole point of this elaborate system, keeping the soft, vulnerable parts of your human body alive and functional in an environment that is fundamentally hostile to human tissue. You're a tropical species, remember? Your ancestors evolved in East African savannas where temperatures rarely dropped below 15 degrees Celsius. Everything about your biology is optimized for warmth. The fact that you can walk through -71 degrees Celsius at all is less a testament to human physiological adaptation and more a triumph of human technological and cultural innovation, the ability to imagine, create, and maintain protective systems that compensate for our biological limitations. The forest continues around you, white and blue and silent. Your clothing system hums along invisibly, performing its complex thermodynamic ballet, keeping the cold at bay one molecular interaction at a time. You're warm, not comfortable exactly, not like sitting by a fire, but stable, sustainable, alive. And that's enough. In Yakutia, at -71 degrees Celsius, that's everything. The first step is always the hardest, they say, but in -71 degrees Celsius that's not quite accurate. Every step is hard, just in different ways, and the challenge evolves as you move deeper into the frozen silence of the taiga. You've been walking for maybe 90 minutes now, and you've settled into a rhythm that's part meditation, part survival calculation, part stubborn determination not to become a cautionary tale. The forest has fully embraced you, or maybe swallowed you. It's hard to tell the difference when you're surrounded by white trees stretching in every direction, their frost-covered branches creating a labyrinth of pale corridors that all look eerily similar. The silence is so complete it almost has texture, like you could reach out and touch it, scoop it up in your oversized mittens and examine it. In this silence, every sound you make seems artificially loud and slightly wrong. The squeak of your boots on the snow, the rustle of your outer coat's canvas against itself, the wheeze of your breath through your ice-crusted scarf. These sounds don't echo like they would in a normal forest. They just exist for a moment and then get absorbed by the cold, dense air and the sound-dampening snow, disappearing as completely as if they never happened. It's like walking through a church where everyone has left and taken the acoustics with them. Your internal monologue has shifted over the course of the walk. At first, your mind was busy with observations, comparisons, running commentary on every sensation and sight. Now, you've fallen into something quieter, more primal. Your conscious thoughts have narrowed to a repeating loop. Watch the trail. Check your fingers. Keep breathing shallowly. Watch the trail. Check your toes. Keep moving. This is what extreme cold does to consciousness. It strips away the unnecessary, the abstract, the philosophical, until you're reduced to a very simple organism with very simple goals. Don't freeze. Don't get lost. Don't stop moving. It's almost peaceful in its simplicity, though peaceful is probably not the word most people would use to describe walking alone through -71 degrees Celsius. The trail ahead is still visible, but it's getting harder to follow in places. Snow has drifted across it since the last person walked through, probably yesterday or the day before, based on how much accumulation there is. In sections where the trail passes through clearings, wind has redistributed the snow into subtle patterns that the Saka call sastrugi, wind-carved snow formations that can range from gentle ripples to knife-edged ridges tall enough to block your path. Reading sastrugi is an art form. The formations tell you which direction the prevailing winds blow from, which helps with navigation. They also indicate where the snow is stable versus where it might collapse under your weight into softer drifts beneath. You're navigating partially by trail, partially by landmark memory, and partially by understanding the terrain's logic. The forest isn't random. It follows patterns. Larch trees grow denser in certain soil conditions. Valleys run in predictable directions based on ancient geological forces. Even the way frost accumulates on tree branches tells you something about sun exposure and wind patterns. The Saka children are taught to read landscape the way urban children are taught to read street signs. It's a literacy of survival, a vocabulary written in snow and shadows and the subtle variations of white on white. A branch hangs across your path at chest height, so laden with frost that it's drooped down from its normal position. You duck under it carefully, avoiding contact. Even brushing against it would shower you with frost crystals that would find their way inside your collar, down your neck, potentially into the sealed microclimate you've worked so hard to maintain. Small mistakes compound in extreme cold. A handful of snow down your back doesn't seem like much, but it means moisture against your wool layer, which means reduced insulation, which means you get slightly colder, which means your body has to work slightly harder to compensate, which means you burn through calories faster and fatigue more quickly. Everything connects to everything else. There's no such thing as a minor inconvenience at minus 71 degrees Celsius, only varying degrees of potentially serious problems. Your sense of time has become unreliable. You know intellectually that you've been walking for about 2 hours, but it feels simultaneously like 20 minutes and like 6 hours. The unchanging twilight erases time's normal markers. No sun climbing toward noon. No lengthening shadows indicating afternoon. No warming or cooling to suggest the day's progression. You exist in a permanent blue moment, a frozen instant stretched to breaking. The Saka language has a specific word for this temporal distortion, kirgeji, which roughly translates to the time that doesn't move, or the long now of winter darkness. It's a psychological challenge that affects even natives who've lived here their entire lives. Humans aren't designed for timeless environments. We need rhythm, progression, the sense that moments are accumulating toward something. Without it, the mind starts playing tricks. You've crossed 2 more frozen streams since the first one, each time that little spike of primal nervousness followed by intellectual reassurance that 2-meter-thick ice isn't going to suddenly collapse. The second stream had a pressure crack running across it. A long, jagged line where the ice had expanded and buckled against itself as temperatures fluctuated. These cracks are common and usually harmless, but they're startling when you first see them, like the earth itself has fractured beneath your feet. Some cracks are narrow enough to step across. Others are a meter wide, revealing the layers of ice formation. Clear ice at the bottom where the water first froze in October, progressively cloudier ice above it as snow fell into the water and froze in place, creating a geological record of the winter so far encoded in frozen strata. You've seen more animal signs. Another set of wolf tracks, these ones fresher, and the distinctive drag marks where a rabbit bounded through deep snow, its hind legs leaving parallel grooves. There are birds here too, though you haven't seen any yet. Certain species, ravens particularly, stay year-round, surviving on carrion and incredible hardiness. Yakutian ravens are slightly larger than their southern cousins, with thicker feathers and a metabolism that can apparently withstand temperatures that would kill most other birds. They're considered sacred by many Saka, messengers between the physical and spirit worlds, and they're definitely clever enough to deserve the reputation. You've heard stories of ravens following winter travelers, waiting to see if the humans survive or become another frozen meal opportunity. Morbid, but pragmatic in an environment where calories are precious and waste is unconscionable. The cold is expressing itself in new ways as you continue. Your joints, knees, hips, ankles are starting to feel stiff like they need oil. This is partly the cold affecting the synovial fluid in your joints, which becomes more viscous at low temperatures, and partly your muscles and tendons tightening up as blood flow to your extremities decreases. You're walking with a slightly different gait than normal, a kind of careful, deliberate stride that minimizes the bending angles of your joints and spreads the load across your whole leg rather than pivoting sharply at knee and ankle. It's the walk of someone wearing too many clothes in too cold temperatures, a universal shuffle that every Yakutian learns young and every visitor learns quickly. Breathing continues to be its own weird challenge. You've developed a rhythm, shallow inhale through your scarf, slow exhale through pursed lips, that minimizes the shock of super cold air hitting your lung tissue. Deep breaths are dangerous. They pull too much cold air too quickly into your lungs, which can trigger bronchospasm or, in extreme cases, actually damage lung tissue through rapid cooling. The Saka technique is to breathe like you're sipping hot tea, small, controlled intakes, giving your nasal passages and throat time to warm the air slightly before it reaches your lungs. Your nose is basically a preheater, using the blood-rich tissue of your turbinates to warm incoming air by a few precious degrees. At minus 71 degrees Celsius, those few degrees matter enormously. You've reached a section of forest where someone, probably the same someone who walked this trail before you, has marked trees with small blazes, strips of bark removed to reveal the white wood underneath. These marks are spaced maybe 50 meters apart, just close enough that you can see the next one from each previous one. They're oriented so they're visible from the trail coming both directions, which is good planning because on the return journey you'll need to follow the same marks in reverse. Trail marking in snow-covered terrain is essential but complicated. You can't rely on the snow trail itself because wind and new snowfall can obscure it quickly. Fixed markers that don't depend on snow conditions are the reliable option, though they require someone to maintain them, periodically refreshing blazes that weather and tree growth obscure over time. Your shadow, such as it is, has shifted position slightly. The sun has moved along its shallow arc, which means hours have passed, though how many hours is hard to judge. The quality of light has changed marginally, slightly more pink now, less blue, suggesting early afternoon in the sense that Yakutian January has afternoons. Your stomach is definitely complaining now, a hollow, gnawing sensation that's moved beyond simple hunger into something more urgent. You're burning through your breakfast calories, running your metabolism in overdrive, and your body is sending increasingly insistent messages that it needs more fuel. You have some food in your pack, dried meat, nuts, a block of very dense, very caloric saka bread called salamat. But stopping to eat means stopping to stand still, which means rapid cooling, which means you need to find an appropriate place to stop rather than just pausing wherever. Ahead, you spot what you're looking for. A small clearing with a fallen log at its edge, positioned so the log is partially sheltered by surrounding trees. This is a good stopping place. You can sit on the log, get off your feet briefly, eat quickly, and get moving again within 5 minutes. You approach the clearing carefully, checking the snow for any signs of recent animal activity. Fresh tracks would mean potentially sharing the space with something that might object to your presence. But the snow is undisturbed except for the faint depression of the trail cutting through one edge. You reach the log and brush snow off a section with your mitt, revealing the bark underneath. Even through your multiple layers, you can feel that the log is colder than the surrounding air. Wood loses heat through conduction, pulling warmth from whatever touches it. You sit down carefully, your padded layers providing some insulation between you and the frozen log, and immediately your body starts complaining about the lack of movement. Within 10 seconds, you feel colder. Within 20 seconds, your toes are tingling. The cold never stops, never takes a break, never gives you a moment's peace. It's always there, always pressing, always looking for weaknesses in your defenses. You pull out the dried meat with clumsy, oversized mittens. Fine motor control is basically impossible in this gear. The meat is frozen solid, of course, hard as a piece of jerky-flavored wood. You tuck it between your cheek and gum, letting your body heat slowly soften it enough to chew. This is traditional sake technique. You don't try to bite through frozen meat, you just let it thaw in your mouth gradually, then chew and swallow the softened portions. It takes forever, but it's safer than trying to bite down and potentially cracking a tooth on meat that's temporarily harder than bone. While you work on the meat, you scan the forest around you, really looking at it for the first time since you started walking. It's stunningly beautiful in an alien, hostile way. Every tree is a sculpture, every branch a delicate study in crystal formation. The light filtering through the frost-heavy branches creates these soft, diffused shadows that don't look quite real, like someone has painted them there without understanding how shadows are supposed to work. Colors are muted, reduced to a palette of white, pale blue, gray, and the occasional dark brown of exposed bark. It's a monochrome world, but one with infinite subtle variations within that limited range. You finish the meat and move on to nuts, walnuts already shelled, carried in a small leather pouch. These too are frozen, but nuts are easier to eat cold than meat. You crack them between your back teeth, extract the nut meat, chew mechanically. Each nut is maybe 20 calories. You eat 10 of them, adding 200 calories to your depleted reserves. It's not nearly enough to replace what you've burned, but it's something. You'll eat more when you finish the walk and reach the next shelter, but for now, this will keep you going. 3 minutes have passed. Your toes are seriously cold now. That transition from uncomfortable to potentially problematic. Time to move. You stand up, stamping your feet a few times to encourage blood flow, and immediately feel slightly better as your muscles start generating heat again. Movement is life. Stillness is death. It's a binary proposition in minus 71 degrees Celsius, no nuance, no middle ground. Back on the trail, the rhythm returns quickly. Step, squeak, breathe. Step, squeak, breathe. Your mind empties again into that narrow focus, that survival consciousness that is surprisingly comfortable once you settle into it. You're not thinking about your job, your relationships, your plans, your anxieties. You're thinking about the next 50 meters of trail and whether your left foot is getting numb. It's remarkably liberating in a way, this forced simplification of existence. Modern life is so complicated, so full of abstract concerns and distant worries. Here, everything is immediate and concrete. Are you warm enough? Yes. Is the trail visible? Yes. Then keep walking. That's the whole equation. The forest continues. The cold continues. You continue. The silence wraps around you like another layer of insulation, and you move through it like a particularly determined ghost, leaving nothing behind but a quickly fading line of boot prints in the singing snow. The forest speaks to those who know how to listen, and right now it's telling you stories written in tracks, frost patterns, and the subtle architecture of survival. You've been walking for close to 3 hours now, and your awareness has shifted from internal monitoring. Am I warm enough? Am I breathing correctly? To external observation. This is the phase where experienced winter travelers start reading the landscape like a book, picking up information that could mean the difference between making it to shelter or spending a very uncomfortable night in a snow trench trying not to become a statistic. The tracks you're seeing tell complex narratives. That line of small, paired prints with a tail drag between them? Ermine, a weasel that's turned winter white and is probably hunting for lemmings under the snow. The explosive pattern of wing prints in fresh snow near a tree base? Some small bird, probably a ptarmigan, took flight suddenly, maybe spooked by a predator, maybe just being neurotic the way birds are. And there, crossing your trail at an angle, a line of prints that makes your heart rate tick upward. Lynx. The tracks are enormous, nearly circular, roughly the size of your fist, with no claw marks visible because cats retract their claws when walking. These prints are recent, within the last hour or two, based on how sharp the edges are and how little frost has accumulated in the depressions. Yakutian lynx are remarkable creatures, and seeing evidence of one nearby is both thrilling and slightly concerning. They're perfectly adapted to deep snow, with paws so large and furry they function as natural snowshoes, allowing them to float across surfaces that would trap other predators. Their fur is absurdly thick, up to 10 centimeters in some places, making them look almost spherical in winter. They're also generally uninterested in humans, preferring to hunt rabbits and occasionally taking down larger prey like young reindeer. Still, you're alone, you're making noise, and you're in their territory. You make a mental note of the track direction, perpendicular to your path, heading deeper into the forest, and continue walking, perhaps slightly more alert than you were 5 minutes ago. The snow itself tells stories. Where the trail passes through clearings, you can see wind patterns etched into the surface, those sastrugi formations mentioned earlier, but now you're reading them more carefully. The ridges all point in roughly the same direction, indicating the prevailing wind comes from the northwest. This matches what you know about Yakutian winter weather patterns. Cold air masses flow down from the Arctic, channeling through valleys and across the flat expanses of the taiga. Understanding wind direction helps with navigation if you lose the trail, but more importantly, it tells you which side of trees and rocks will have more accumulated snow, which sides will be swept clear, and where the dangerous cornices, overhanging snow formations that can collapse under weight, are likely to form. The trees themselves are information dense. Large trees don't grow symmetrically in this climate. They tend to have more branches and denser growth on their southern sides where they receive more of the limited winter sunlight. This asymmetry is subtle, but once you learn to see it, every tree becomes a compass. The frost accumulation is thicker on northern exposures where the weak sun never reaches and sublimation happens more slowly. Even the lichens growing on bark show patterns. Certain species prefer northern exposures, others southern, creating a color-coded map if you know which colors mean what. The Saka teach their children these signs from early ages, and historians still argue whether this environmental literacy is becoming lost knowledge in the modern era of GPS devices or whether it's being passed down as faithfully as ever, just less visibly. You're noticing now how the forest's density varies. Some sections are thick with trees, trunks so close together you'd have difficulty walking off-trail. Other areas open up into clearings or thinly populated zones where trees are spaced meters apart. These variations aren't random. They reflect fire history, soil conditions, drainage patterns, and microclimates that vary by elevation and exposure. The open areas tend to be colder because there's less wind protection and less canopy to trap heat radiating from the earth. The dense sections are marginally warmer but harder to navigate. The trail follows a route that balances these factors, threading through the forest in a way that minimizes exposure while maintaining navigability. You pass a tree that's been marked with strange symbols. Not the simple blazes you've seen earlier, but what look like deliberate carvings, weathered and old. 3 horizontal lines above a triangle, with dots arranged around them. This could be traditional Saka wayfinding, or it could be something else entirely. A territorial marker, a spiritual symbol, or just someone's idle carving from decades ago. The Saka have a complex relationship with the forest that mixes practical knowledge with spiritual belief. Certain trees are considered sacred, certain places are avoided. Certain practices must be observed when taking wood or hunting game. You're not Saka yourself, so you don't fully understand the significance of these symbols, but you've been told to respect marked trees and not to disturb them. So you note their presence and move on, leaving the tree as you found it. The snow depth continues to vary, and you're starting to develop an intuition for reading it. Deep snow looks soft, almost fluffy, with no crust visible on top. This is dangerous snow. Step into it and you might sink to your hip, burning tremendous energy trying to extract yourself. Crusted snow has a slight sheen, a firmness that suggests you'll stay on top. Wind-packed snow is the best, compressed and stable, almost walkable without snowshoes. The trail you're following is mostly packed, which is why you're able to maintain this pace. Somewhere behind you or ahead of you, someone has done the hard work of breaking trail, and you're benefiting from their effort. This is how winter travel works in Yakutia. People follow established routes when possible, reinforcing them with each passage, creating highways of packed snow that persist all winter. A sound breaks the silence. A creak and groan from somewhere in the forest to your right. You stop, listening. Another creak, then a sharp crack like a gunshot. Trees protesting the cold, their sap freezing and expanding, their wood contracting. It's unnerving until you learn to recognize it, this forest soundtrack of thermal stress. Sometimes entire trees split open with sounds like thunder. Sometimes it's just small branches cracking. The Saka say the forest is talking when this happens, sharing its discomfort with anyone willing to listen. From a scientific perspective, it's simply the physics of materials being pushed to their operational limits. From an emotional perspective, walking through a forest that randomly explodes with sound definitely adds a certain tension to the experience. Your face scarf is now approaching critical mass. The accumulated ice has reached the point where it's genuinely uncomfortable, pulling on your neck, chafing your cheeks, making it difficult to turn your head. You stop briefly, just 10 seconds, not long enough to get dangerously cold, and adjust the scarf, trying to redistribute the weight, brush away some of the loose surface ice. It helps marginally. The scarf will need to be fully removed and dried tonight. The ice melted and the fabric re-dried before tomorrow's walk. This is the nightly ritual of extreme cold travel. Maintaining your gear, dealing with moisture accumulation, preparing for the next day's challenges. Nothing stays dry, nothing stays perfect. You're constantly managing degradation, constantly fighting entropy's tendency to disorder your carefully organized survival system. The light is shifting again, becoming more orange now, less blue. Afternoon is transitioning toward evening, though the sun will barely set. It'll just slide along the horizon and then start climbing again in its shallow arc. The quality of shadows changes throughout this process, lengthening and shortening in subtle ways that affect how you perceive depth and distance. What looks like a dip in the trail might be a shadow. What looks like a shadow might be a hole that could twist your ankle. You have to constantly recalibrate your visual interpretation, not trusting your first assessment of the terrain ahead. You've reached a section where the trail runs along a ridgeline. Not a dramatic ridge, just a gentle elevation that rises maybe 10 meters above the surrounding forest floor. From here, you have a better view of the landscape, and it's breathtaking in the most literal sense. The forest extends in every direction, white and blue and infinite, rolling away toward horizons that blur into haze. No buildings are visible, no roads, no power lines, no signs of human presence except the narrow trail under your feet. This is how most of Earth looked for most of human history: wild, unmodified, indifferent to human concerns. It's humbling and slightly terrifying and oddly comforting all at once. In the distance, maybe 5 kilometers away, you can see what might be smoke. A thin gray column rising straight up in the still air. That would be another settlement. Another cluster of humans maintaining their small pocket of warmth against the cold infinity. Seeing it reminds you that you're not actually alone out here, that this landscape, hostile as it is also inhabited and known. People live here. Children play in this cold. Families thrive in conditions that would kill most humans within hours. It's a testament to human adaptability, human stubbornness, human refusal to accept environmental limitations as final. The smoke also serves a practical purpose. It gives you a confirmation point for your mental map of the area. You know roughly where that settlement is, which means you can orient yourself relative to it, which means you can verify that you're still on course toward your intended destination. Navigation in featureless winter landscapes is genuinely difficult. Without the smoke column, without the trail, without the marked trees, you could easily walk in circles, disoriented by the uniform whiteness and the lack of distinctive landmarks. The Saka have stories about winter travelers who died within a kilometer of safety because they became disoriented and walked in the wrong direction. These stories are told not to frighten but to teach. Pay attention. Stay oriented. Don't assume you know where you are. You descend from the ridgeline back into denser forest, and the sense of exposure diminishes. The trees close in around you again, creating that tunnel effect, and the wind, what little wind there is, drops to absolute zero. This is better for temperature management but worse for sight lines. You're back in the maze, following the white thread of trail through the white forest, trusting that the people who established this route knew what they were doing and that the trail leads somewhere useful. Your mind has entered a strange state that might be hypnosis or might be hypothermia's early stages or might just be the natural result of hours of repetitive physical activity in extreme conditions. Thoughts come and go without much coherence. You think about the lynx tracks. You think about the weight of ice on your face. You think about whether you remember to tell anyone your planned route, and then you remember that yes, you did, you left a written note with estimated return time. You think about what you'll eat when you finish walking. Hot soup sounds impossibly good right now, something with fat and salt and protein. You think about how weird it is that humans do things like this voluntarily, walking through temperatures that could kill them, and then you remember that for the Saka, this isn't adventure tourism, it's Tuesday. Just another day of winter, nothing special, the baseline reality of living at the edge of human habitability. A quirky historical fact surfaces in your wandering thoughts. Yakutsk, the regional capital, is built on permafrost so thick that buildings can't be constructed normally. They'd melt the permafrost beneath them and collapse into the resulting mud. Instead, everything is built on stilts or pillars that extend down to bedrock or stable permafrost layers, creating a cityscape where buildings float above the ground on forests of support columns. It looks bizarre in photos, very Soviet brutalist apartment blocks standing on what look like enormous toothpicks, but it's brilliant engineering adapted to impossible conditions. The Saka have been solving problems like this for centuries, developing technologies and techniques that work in extreme cold because conventional approaches fail spectacularly. You spot more tracks, these ones small and bounded, arranged in clusters. Rabbit, probably Arctic hare, which turn white in winter and somehow survive by eating bark and twigs and whatever vegetation they can access under the snow. They're a crucial food source for every predator in the forest, which means they're constantly alert, constantly moving, living lives of permanent low-level terror, which honestly sounds exhausting. Being apex predator material like humans comes with the luxury of not having to worry constantly about being eaten, though at minus 71 degrees Celsius, exposure is its own kind of predator, just as deadly and far more patient. The trail ahead appears to fork, and you slow down, examining the options. The right fork looks more used, deeper depression, clearer definition. The left fork is fainter, maybe less recently traveled. You choose right, following the principle that more traffic usually means safer route, better maintained trail, higher probability of encountering help if needed. This decision-making process is constant in winter navigation. You're always reading signs, making judgments, choosing between options based on incomplete information. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. The consequences of being wrong in extreme cold are significantly higher than in temperate climates, which means you develop a healthy paranoia about double-checking your choices. Your feet are starting to hurt, not from cold, but from the opposite. They're too warm in their cocoon of felt and fur and silk, and your toes are beginning to feel compressed, slightly swollen from increased blood flow. This is actually a good sign. It means your circulation is working properly, and your core temperature is stable enough that your body isn't restricting peripheral blood flow. But it's uncomfortable in a way that's difficult to address without removing your boots, which you absolutely cannot do in minus 71 degrees Celsius. So you just accept the discomfort, file it away in the category of things to deal with later, and keep walking. The forest continues. The cold continues. The silent white maze extends in every direction, beautiful and terrible and utterly indifferent to whether you make it through or not. Time has become a strange, elastic thing, stretching and compressing in ways that make you question whether clocks ever made sense in the first place. You've been walking for 4 hours? 5? The unchanging light makes it impossible to judge without checking your watch, and checking your watch requires unwrapping layers and exposing skin and generally disrupting your carefully maintained thermal equilibrium. So you don't check. You just walk, existing in what the Saka call kirgeiji, that timeless state where minutes and hours lose their meaning and there's only the eternal now of cold and movement and breath. The darkness isn't darkness, not exactly. Even in the depth of Yakutian winter, even during what technically counts as night, there's ambient light, starlight reflected off snow, moonlight when the moon is up, and even without those, a kind of luminous quality to the snow itself that defies easy explanation. Scientists attribute it to ice crystal reflection and the way human eyes adapt to low light. But the Saka have older explanations involving the spirits of the land glowing faintly to guide travelers. Either way, you can see well enough to follow the trail, though everything has taken on a dreamlike quality, shapes and shadows bleeding into each other at the edges. The stars, when you look up, are absolutely violent in their brightness. With no light pollution for hundreds of kilometers and air so cold and dry it's nearly transparent, the night sky looks like someone punched holes in a black curtain and let infinity pour through. You can see the Milky Way as a thick band of light arcing overhead, individual stars so numerous and densely packed that they blur together into clouds of luminescence. The Saka have their own constellation systems, different from Western astronomy, mapping stories and seasonal markers onto these same stars their ancestors watched centuries ago. You recognize a few Western constellations: Orion, looking somehow more aggressive in the Arctic sky, and Ursa Major, the Great Bear, which takes on new significance when you're walking through actual bear country, though thankfully bears are hibernating right now and not a concern. The cold has a different character at night. Sharper somehow, more hostile, like it's been waiting all day for the sun to disappear so it could really get to work. Your face feels more numb than before, and you're having to work harder to maintain the shallow breathing rhythm that keeps your lungs safe. The temperature has probably dropped another 5 or 6 degrees from the minus 71 degrees Celsius you started with. At some point, the differences between extremely cold and even more extremely cold should become meaningless, but your body disagrees, detecting and protesting each incremental degree of increased hostility. You've been navigating by starlight and memory for the last hour, following a trail that's less visible now but still discernible as a slight depression in the snow, a path of lesser resistance through the forest. Navigation at night in polar regions has its own rich history of trial, error, and occasionally tragic failure. Early European explorers of the Arctic often died because they didn't understand how to read snow conditions or how to navigate by stars in latitudes where familiar constellations behave strangely. The indigenous peoples, Saka, Evenk, Chukchi, and others, had thousands of years of accumulated knowledge that allowed them to travel confidently in conditions that baffled outsiders. Some historians still argue whether this knowledge was primarily observational or whether it incorporated genuine astronomical understanding, but the practical result was the same. Indigenous travelers survived where outsiders perished. Movement takes on a meditative quality during night travel. Each step becomes its own small ritual. Place boot carefully, shift weight, lift other boot, place it, shift, repeat. Your mind, having long since run out of interesting thoughts, has begun recycling the same observations and concerns. Are your toes warm? Check. Are you on the trail? Check. Is that shadow actually a shadow or a depression in the snow? Check by adjusting your head position and seeing if the shadow moves relative to background. The cognitive loops are tighter now, more focused, your consciousness narrowed to a pinpoint of immediate survival awareness. The scarf situation has reached critical. The accumulated ice now extends several centimeters beyond the fabric's actual surface, creating a frozen mask that's actively painful where it presses against your cheeks. You can feel cold spots developing, not frostbite yet, but the warning tingles that indicate certain patches of skin are getting colder than they should be. You need to deal with this, but dealing with it means stopping, means exposing your face to direct air, means risking serious cold injury in the name of preventing lesser cold injury. It's a calculation, a gamble, and you're not quite desperate enough yet to take it. The destination can't be much farther. You can endure another hour if necessary. Probably. You pass a tree that's split completely in half. The trunk opened like a book, the interior wood exposed and glittering with frost. This is spectacular even by Yakutian standards. A tree may be 50 centimeters in diameter, torn apart by the sheer force of freezing sap expanding within its cells. The crack is fresh, probably from tonight, and you can still smell the sap. A sharp, resinous odor that cuts through the otherwise odorless cold air. The exposed wood is pale, almost white, and already accumulating frost. By morning, it'll be completely encased, indistinguishable from the older split trees except for the fresh sap smell. Nature is constantly destroying and rebuilding itself out here, though the destruction is more visible than the rebuilding during winter. A sound reaches you, faint but distinct voices. Human voices, speaking Saka, the syllables carrying across the cold air with that perfect clarity that extreme cold provides. You can't see the speakers, but you can hear them clearly enough to tell there are at least two people, maybe three, having what sounds like a normal conversation. They're not in distress, not calling for help, just talking the way people talk. This is simultaneously reassuring. You're not as alone as you felt, and disorienting. Where are they? How far away? Sound travels deceptively in these conditions, and those voices could be 200 meters away or a kilometer away, impossible to judge accurately. You keep walking, and gradually the voices fade, or maybe you're moving away from them, or maybe they've stopped talking. The silence returns, more profound for having been briefly interrupted. You realize you haven't heard human voices other than your own thoughts in hours, and hearing them felt strange, almost intrusive, like someone had turned on a radio in the middle of a meditation session. The solitude of winter walking is part of its appeal for some people, the complete withdrawal from human noise and human concerns, but it can also be psychologically challenging, especially over multiple days. The Saka traditionally travel in groups during winter for safety, but also for mental health. Humans are social primates. Extended isolation, even voluntary isolation, goes against our wiring. Your hands inside their multiple mitten layers are uncomfortable in a new way. They've been gripping your walking stick for hours, maintaining the same position, and your fingers are cramping. You flex them carefully inside the mittens, working blood through the tendons, feeling the stiffness and the slight ache of muscles held too long in contraction. Fine motor control is a distant memory. You couldn't work a zipper or tie a knot if your life depended on it right now, which is why all your critical closures are already secured and why you designed your gear system to not require any mid-journey adjustments that need dexterity. The forest has thinned out again, and you're crossing a larger open area. Maybe an old burn zone, maybe naturally sparse, hard to tell in the darkness. The increased exposure means increased wind, though wind is generous. It's more like a gentle, persistent air movement, maybe 3 kilometers per hour, but at these temperatures even that's enough to drive wind chill lower and make the cold noticeably more aggressive. You hunch your shoulders, tuck your chin, minimize your profile, and push through the opening as quickly as safety allows. The far tree line seems to take forever to reach, each step feeling inadequate, like you're walking on a treadmill where the destination never gets closer. You're definitely getting tired now, not just physically fatigued from hours of walking, but systemically exhausted from the constant cold stress. Your body has been working overtime since you stepped outside this morning, burning through calories, managing temperature, fighting entropy. The metabolic cost of staying alive in minus 71 degrees Celsius for extended periods is staggering. A person at rest in room temperature burns roughly 1,800 calories per day. That same person in extreme cold burns closer to 5,000 to 6,000 calories per day just maintaining core temperature. And that's before adding the caloric cost of actual physical activity. You're probably in a 3,000 to 4,000 calorie deficit right now, running on reserves, your body metabolizing its own stored fat and muscle to keep the furnace burning. The fatigue manifests as a kind of heavy, thick feeling in your limbs, like you're moving through honey rather than air. Your thoughts are slower, more labored, requiring conscious effort to complete. This could be simple exhaustion, or it could be the beginning of genuine hypothermia, your core temperature dropping below safe levels, your brain function beginning to deteriorate. The distinction matters enormously, but it's hard to assess yourself accurately when you're the one potentially suffering cognitive impairment from cold. This is another reason the Saka travel in groups. Partners can spot the signs of hypothermia or frostbite that the affected person might miss. You do a mental status check, running through basic questions you've memorized for exactly this purpose. What's your name? You answer correctly. Where are you? Yakutia, walking the forest trail from shelter to shelter. What day is it? That one takes longer, but you eventually remember. What's 7 times 8? 56. Your math skills are intact. You're probably okay, probably just tired, probably not sliding into dangerous territory. Probably. The uncertainty is part of what makes extreme cold so insidious. You can't always trust your own assessment of your condition, which means you have to maintain a paranoid level of self-monitoring, even when your brain is foggy with exhaustion. The trail dips down into a small valley, and you follow it carefully, aware that downhill walking in bulky clothing on frozen terrain is an excellent way to fall and potentially injure yourself. A twisted ankle out here would escalate from painful inconvenience to life-threatening emergency very quickly. You plant each step deliberately, keeping your weight centered over your feet, using your walking stick for balance. The descent takes several minutes, and at the bottom you find another frozen stream, narrower than the others, maybe 4 meters across, the ice surface rough and opaque. Crossing the stream, you notice something that makes you pause. There are more marks here, intentional marks, carved into the ice itself. Arrows pointing upstream and downstream with what look like distance markers, notches grouped in sets of 5. This is a traditional Saka trail marker system, indicating distances to various destinations. If you're reading it correctly, and assuming the standard measurement units, you're maybe 2 kilometers from the next major shelter. 2 kilometers is roughly 45 minutes at your current pace, maybe an hour if you're being very careful. This is enormously encouraging. The end is in sight, metaphorically speaking. The knowledge that shelter is near gives you a second wind, a burst of renewed energy that's partly psychological and partly physiological. Your body releasing a bit more adrenaline, borrowing from reserves it was holding back, gambling that you can make it the rest of the way before those reserves run out. You pick up your pace slightly, not rushing but moving with more purpose, less meditation and more determination. The trail on the far side of the stream climbs back up out of the valley, and you tackle the ascent with something approaching enthusiasm, which is probably a sign of impending delirium, but you choose to interpret it as positive motivation. The climb takes you back into dense forest, and the sense of enclosure is almost comforting now. The trees blocking whatever wind exists, creating a marginally more hospitable microclimate. The trail winds between large larch trunks, and you notice more blazes on trees, more frequent now, confirming that you're on a well-established route approaching a populated area. Populated being relative, maybe there are 5 families at the shelter destination, maybe 10, this being Yakutia, where town can mean anything from a single house to a cluster of a dozen dwellings spread across several kilometers. Your mind starts planning the arrival, the process of removing layers carefully in the shelter's entryway, allowing your body to adjust gradually to warmth rather than shocking it with sudden temperature change. The ritual of drying gear, especially the face scarf with its heavy ice accumulation. The joy of hot tea, hot food, hot anything. The possibility of actual conversation with other humans rather than just the internal monologue that's been your only companion for hours. These thoughts carry you forward, one step at a time, through the frozen darkness of the Yakutian night. The mind does peculiar things under prolonged extreme cold exposure, and you're discovering this firsthand as you push through what you hope is the final stretch of tonight's journey. Your thoughts have become slippery, difficult to hold on to, like trying to grab fish with your bare hands. You'll start thinking about the shelter ahead and then suddenly realize you've been mentally composing a grocery list for a picnic that will never happen, or replaying a conversation from years ago with perfect clarity despite having no idea why your brain decided that particular memory was relevant right now. This is your consciousness trying to protect itself, perhaps by retreating into mental noise that's less demanding than constant vigilance. Cold affects cognitive function in documented, measurable ways that researchers have studied extensively in Arctic conditions and laboratory simulations. When your core temperature drops even slightly, and yours has definitely dropped over the course of this walk, your brain begins prioritizing basic survival functions over higher reasoning. Complex problem-solving deteriorates first, followed by memory formation, then judgment and decision-making. At severe hypothermia levels, people famously make catastrophically bad choices, like removing their clothing in freezing temperatures because their confused thermoregulatory system convinces them they're overheating. You're nowhere near that stage, but you're definitely experiencing the milder cognitive effects, the mental fog, the attention drift, the way simple tasks require disproportionate concentration. What's fascinating is how your brain adapts to compensate. You've developed hyper-awareness of certain things while completely ignoring others. You can assess the snow conditions ahead with a glance, reading texture and crust and stability without conscious thought. You're tracking wind direction, temperature changes, and the position of stars automatically, processing this information in some backchannel of consciousness that doesn't require deliberate attention. But ask you what you had for dinner 3 days ago and you'd struggle to remember. Ask you to recite anything complex and you'd fumble over words that would normally come easily. Your brain has reallocated its resources, become a specialized survival processor, excellent at its narrow focus and hopeless at everything else. The Saka have observed this for generations, though they describe it differently. They talk about cut, a concept that roughly translates to soul, but encompasses consciousness, life force, and mental capacity. During extreme cold, they say your cut becomes smaller, tighter, drawn inward to protect itself. You become less yourself and more a collection of survival instincts temporarily housed in your body. Modern neuroscience would describe it as altered consciousness due to mild hypothermia, reduced cerebral blood flow, and exhaustion-induced cognitive impairment. Both descriptions point to the same reality. Right now, you're not quite the person you were when you started walking this morning. This altered state has a strange beauty to it, though. Colors seem more vivid in the starlight, edges sharper despite the darkness. You're noticing details you'd normally miss. The way frost crystals on a nearby branch are arranged in fractal patterns, each tiny formation a perfect geometric echo of the larger structure. The way your breath ice falls like glitter through the star-illuminated air, each particle catching light and releasing it in miniature flashes. Time has stretched so thin it's practically transparent. You exist in an extended moment that encompasses all moments, walking through a forest that could be anywhere, anywhen, eternal and immediate simultaneously. Your emotional regulation has also shifted. Things that would normally provoke strong reactions, the discomfort, the fear, the isolation, feel distant, manageable, almost interesting in an abstract way. This is probably your brain's way of conserving energy, shutting down emotionally expensive processes to focus resources on physical survival. The Saka described this as salgin, a state of cold-induced calm that experienced winter travelers cultivate deliberately. It's not quite meditation and not quite dissociation, but something in between, a mental mode that's specifically adapted to extended cold exposure. Western psychology doesn't have a precise term for it, though it shares characteristics with flow states, hypnotic trance, and the psychological adaptations seen in extreme athletes and military personnel under stress. You notice your walking rhythm has changed. Earlier, you were consciously placing each step, monitoring your pace, actively navigating. Now, your body seems to be walking itself, following the trail automatically while your conscious mind drifts through half-formed thoughts and sensory observations. This is dangerous if it leads to inattention, but it's also efficient, your cerebellum and motor cortex handling the walking while your higher cognitive functions rest and recover. Athletes call this muscle memory, but it's more sophisticated than that. It's your nervous system creating automated routines for repetitive tasks, freeing up mental bandwidth for other processing. The forest around you has taken on a personality. Individual trees have become familiar presences. There's the one with 3 trunks growing from a single base, the one that's bent at a 45-degree angle from some long-ago storm, the one whose branches form a perfect archway over the trail. You're not anthropomorphizing them exactly, but you're relating to them as landmarks, as companions of a sort, fellow travelers through this frozen night. This is probably another cognitive adaptation. Humans are social creatures who assign agency and personality to our environment when actual human company isn't available. It's why people name their cars, talk to their plants, form emotional attachments to inanimate objects. Your brain needs social connection and will manufacture it from whatever materials are available. Sound continues to behave strangely. You hear the crunch of your boots and the rustle of your clothing with crystalline clarity. But these sounds seem to exist in isolation, disconnected from each other and from you. Meanwhile, distant sounds, that crack of a tree splitting somewhere far off, the whisper of wind through branches 100 meters away, arrive with equal clarity, creating a flattened acoustic landscape where distance has lost its meaning. This is disorienting when you notice it, which you try not to do because noticing it makes walking harder, makes you question your spatial awareness, makes you doubt your ability to judge what's near and what's far. Your face beneath the ice-crusted scarf has entered an interesting state of numbness that's moved beyond discomfort into something almost pleasant. The cold is still there, still pressing against your skin, but the sensation has been dialed down to a dull, manageable pressure. This is your nervous system adapting, down-regulating pain signals that aren't providing useful information. You already know it's cold. Additional pain signals are just noise. The medical term is sensory adaptation, and it happens with all kinds of stimuli. It's why you stop noticing the feeling of clothes on your skin after wearing them for a while. Right now, it's why your face feels less frozen than it did 2 hours ago despite being objectively colder. There's danger in this adaptation, of course. Frostbite doesn't hurt while it's happening. That's part of what makes it insidious. The tissue freezes, ice crystals form between and within cells, blood flow stops, and you feel nothing much. Maybe a slight tingling, maybe increasing numbness, but nothing that screams emergency. People have lost fingers and toes to frostbite while insisting they felt fine, their nervous system having adapted so thoroughly to the cold that it stopped reporting the damage. This is why you have to keep doing manual checks, physically assessing your extremities even when they feel okay, not trusting the subjective experience of comfort when objective conditions remain life-threatening. You stop for one of these checks now, standing still, dangerous but necessary, and working each finger individually inside your mittens, making sure each one responds, each one moves, each one retains sensation. They all do. You stamp your feet, feeling your toes respond inside their cocoon of felt and fur. Still alive, still functioning. You press your mittened hand against your cheeks through the scarf, using the contrast to assess temperature. Face is cold but not frozen cold. Not dead cold. Everything checks out. You've been managing this well. You allow yourself a moment of pride before remembering that pride is a luxury you can't afford until you're actually safe inside shelter. Pride comes after survival, not during it. Movement resumes, and with it, that strange mental drift. You find yourself thinking about the historical psychology of extreme cold survival, how different cultures developed different mental frameworks for coping with environments that are fundamentally hostile to human life. The Inuit developed sophisticated linguistic and conceptual systems for categorizing different types of snow and ice, creating a cognitive map that helped them navigate and survive. The Saka developed elaborate spiritual frameworks that personified natural forces, making the environment feel less alien and more like a community of intentional agents that could be negotiated with, respected, appeased. European explorers, lacking these frameworks, often approached the Arctic with assumptions imported from temperate climates and paid for it with their lives. There's a scholarly debate, you're remembering this from some article you read months ago, the memory surfacing with surprising clarity, about whether indigenous Arctic survival knowledge represents genuine scientific understanding or cultural knowledge that happens to work without necessarily understanding why it works. Some anthropologists argue that the distinction is meaningless, that practical knowledge is knowledge regardless of whether it's framed in scientific terminology. Others maintain that understanding mechanism matters, that scientific knowledge is categorically different from cultural practice. You lack the mental clarity right now to have an opinion on this debate, but you note with some amusement that you're alive right now partly because of Saka cultural knowledge, walking in Saka-designed boots, wrapped in Saka-designed clothing, following Saka-established trails. Whatever you want to call that knowledge, it's working. Your thoughts are interrupted by a sound ahead, mechanical, artificial, utterly out of place in this frozen wilderness. It takes your foggy brain several seconds to identify it. A generator. Someone is running a generator, which means electricity, which means habitation, which means you've reached the destination. Relief floods through you, and with it, a sudden awareness of just how exhausted you are. The mental discipline that's been holding you together begins to relax slightly, and fatigue crashes over you like a wave. The trail curves ahead, and suddenly there are lights. Actual electric lights, impossibly bright after hours of starlight and darkness. Streaming from windows in buildings you can now see perhaps 100 meters ahead. 3 structures, maybe 4, clustered together, smoke rising from chimneys, the generator rumbling steadily in the background. It's the most beautiful sight you've seen in your entire life, or at least it feels that way right now, your cold-addled brain flooding you with relief and anticipation. You've made it. 8 hours of walking through minus 71 degrees Celsius, through the darkness, through the psychological and physical challenges of extreme cold exposure, and you've actually made it. The destination is real, not a hypothermic hallucination, not a miscalculation in navigation. You're going to be warm soon. You're going to eat hot food and drink hot tea and sleep in something approximating comfort. But you're not there yet. 100 meters remains, and 100 meters in extreme cold is still dangerous. You force yourself to maintain the careful pace, not rushing, not letting excitement override caution. This is when accidents happen, when people think they're safe and let their guard down prematurely. The trail is still icy. You're still exhausted. The cold is still trying to kill you. So you walk carefully, deliberately, maintaining the discipline that's kept you alive this long. The buildings grow larger as you approach. You can see details now, windows steaming from interior warmth, wooden walls, metal roofs weighted down against wind. There are snowmobiles parked near one building, and what looks like a dog pen, though the dogs must be inside or silent. The smell of wood smoke reaches you, rich and complex, carrying hints of burning larch and cooked food. 50 meters, 40, 30. Each step brings you closer to salvation, and each step takes enormous effort because your body knows safety is near and wants to simply shut down now, wants to stop the forced march of survival and collapse into rest. But you don't let it. You keep walking, keep placing one boot in front of the other, keep moving forward through the final stretch of this frozen journey. The transition from extreme cold to shelter is a delicate process, not the immediate relief most people imagine. You can't just burst through the door and collapse next to a roaring fire. Well, you could, but you'd risk cold-induced vasodilation, a dangerous condition where your constricted blood vessels suddenly expand when exposed to heat, potentially causing a catastrophic drop in blood pressure. The Saka have a specific protocol for this transition, developed over centuries of trial and error and presumably more than a few unfortunate incidents that taught them what not to do. You reach the first building, a low structure made from thick logs, gaps between them chinked with moss and mud, and stop in the entryway, a small enclosed space between the outer door and the inner door that serves as a thermal buffer. This entryway, called a tuaz Saka, is kept deliberately cold, maybe minus 20 degrees Celsius, which sounds brutal but is actually 50 degrees warmer than the outside air. You stand here for several minutes, letting your body begin adjusting, your blood vessels cautiously starting to dilate, your metabolism beginning the complex process of recalibrating from emergency survival mode to something approaching normal function. The ice on your face scarf has reached absurd proportions. It's now a solid mask, probably weighing 3 kilograms, frozen so thoroughly that you can't simply pull the scarf away from your face. You have to work carefully, warming the scarf with your mittened hands, melting the ice where it's bonded to the wool, slowly peeling the frozen fabric away from your skin. The process takes 10 minutes and is surprisingly painful. The scarf has frozen to small patches of exposed skin on your cheeks and chin, and removing it pulls at the frost-damaged tissue. You finally get it off, revealing a scarf that's more ice sculpture than fabric, and hang it on a peg where dozens of other similarly ice-encrusted scarves already hang like strange frozen trophies. Your face, now exposed to the relatively warmer air of the entryway, begins reporting sensations in a cascade of pins and needles that's intensely uncomfortable. This is blood returning to capillaries that have been constricted for hours, nerve endings waking up and loudly complaining about the conditions they've endured. Your cheeks feel like they're burning, though they're still objectively cold. Your lips are cracked and bleeding slightly, another consequence of hours of cold exposure and frozen breath. You resist the urge to lick them. That would just introduce more moisture that would freeze and make things worse. You start removing layers, but slowly, methodically, following the protocol. First, the outer wind layer comes off, the fish oil-treated canvas jacket that's kept the wind at bay. It's stiff with frost, accumulation that built up from your body's escaping heat meeting the external cold and freezing at the interface. You brush off what frost you can and hang it beside your scarf. Next comes the fur deal, which requires careful unwrapping since it closes asymmetrically. The reindeer hair is matted with frost, and you spend several minutes brushing it out, working the fur back to its normal fluffy state. This isn't vanity. Matted fur doesn't insulate properly, and you'll need this deal in good condition for tomorrow's journey. A door opens, the inner door, and a woman looks out. She's Sokka, middle-aged, with a face that's seen many winters and carries the slight weathering that comes from a lifetime in extreme cold. She takes in your appearance with a single glance, the careful, slow way you're removing layers, the frost still clinging to your clothing, the measured pace of your movements, and nods approvingly. "Good," she says in Sokka-accented Russian. "You know protocol. Many outsiders rush, make themselves sick. Come inside when ready, not before." She disappears back inside, leaving you alone in the entryway. You appreciate this enormously. There's no pressure to hurry, no audience for your slow, awkward disrobing, just quiet acknowledgement that you're doing things correctly and permission to take the time you need. This is part of Sokka hospitality. Understanding that travelers arriving from extreme cold need space and time to transition safely, that rushing the process out of eagerness to offer warmth and comfort can actually cause harm. You continue the layer removal. The wool layer is damp with absorbed sweat despite your best efforts to avoid overheating during the walk. This is inevitable. The human body produces moisture, and some of it gets trapped in clothing layers no matter how carefully designed the system. You'll need to dry this thoroughly tonight. The silk base layer, surprisingly, is less damp than the wool. It's done its job of wicking moisture away from your skin and passing it outward to the wool layer. Still, it smells powerfully of your body's 8-hour effort to stay alive, and you'll want to wash it when possible. Your hands, freed from the 3-layer mitten system, look surprisingly normal. A bit swollen, a bit pink, but all fingers present and functional. You flex them experimentally, working blood through tendons and joints that have been held in limited positions for hours. The dried grass from your boots comes out next. Damp, compressed, no longer useful. You'll get fresh grass before tomorrow's departure. Your feet, when you finally expose them, are wrinkled and slightly macerated from hours in the enclosed environment, but warm, uninjured, perfectly intact. Success. The entryway has other people's gear hanging and drying. Several sets of scarves, mittens, boots, indicating this shelter is hosting multiple travelers tonight. This is both reassuring and slightly concerning. Reassuring because more people means more safety, more collective knowledge, more resources if something goes wrong. Concerning because it means less privacy, shared sleeping space, potential social complications. But these are problems of warmth and safety, infinitely preferable to the problems of cold and isolation you've been dealing with all day. You finally open the inner door and step into the main room, and the heat hits you like a physical force. It's probably only 15 degrees Celsius in here. The Sokka keep winter interiors much cooler than Western standards, partly to conserve fuel and partly because extreme temperature gradients between inside and outside make transitions dangerous. But after 8 hours in minus 71 degrees Celsius, 15 degrees feels like a sauna. Your body doesn't know how to process this warmth. Your skin tingles intensely, your face flushes red as blood vessels dilate rapidly, and you feel momentarily dizzy as your cardiovascular system recalibrates. The room is a traditional Sokka winter dwelling, dominated by a large masonry stove in the center that radiates steady, even heat. These stoves, called common, are engineering marvels. They burn wood efficiently, heat large masses of brick that continue radiating warmth long after the fire has died down, and distribute heat more evenly than metal stoves. There are sleeping platforms arranged around the room's perimeter, elevated slightly off the floor where cold air settles. Several people are present. The woman who spoke to you earlier, an elderly man repairing fishing nets, two younger men playing cards at a small table, and a child of maybe 8 or 9 doing homework in the corner. Everyone looks up as you enter, assessing you with that same quick, comprehensive glance the woman used earlier. You can feel them evaluating your condition, your gear, your level of experience, whether you're a competent winter traveler or a liability waiting to happen. You must pass inspection because they all nod or grunt acknowledgement and return to their activities. The woman gestures toward an empty sleeping platform. Rest there. Food soon. Tea now if you want. Tea sounds like the most wonderful thing in the universe. You nod, managing to croak out yes, please in Russian, your voice rough from hours of minimal speaking. She pours from a large samovar that's been keeping water hot, adds a chunk of dark tea concentrate, and hands you a mug. The mug is warm against your hands. Not hot, but warm. And you wrap your fingers around it carefully, letting the heat seep into your cold, stiffened joints. The first sip of tea is a revelation. It's sweet, strongly brewed, with a slightly bitter edge that suggests it's been stewing in the samovar for hours. The warmth spreads down your throat into your stomach, and you can almost feel your core temperature beginning to rise. Your metabolism recognizing that emergency measures are no longer necessary and beginning to stand down from crisis mode. You drink slowly, letting your mouth and throat adjust to the temperature, avoiding the temptation to gulp it down despite your desperate thirst. Historians still argue whether the samovar, that iconic Russian/Saka heated urn for making tea, was originally a Russian invention adopted by the Saka or vice versa, but its importance in Arctic survival is unquestionable. Hot liquid is crucial for rewarming hypothermic individuals, and the samovar's ability to keep large quantities of water hot for extended periods using minimal fuel makes it perfectly adapted to extreme cold conditions. The communal aspect is important too. Sharing tea from a common samovar creates social bonds, encourages conversation, provides a ritual structure for the long winter evenings when darkness and cold confine people indoors for 16, 18, 20 hours at a stretch. You find a seat near the stove but not too near. You still need to warm up gradually, and sitting directly next to the heat source would reverse all the careful transitioning you've done. Your body feels strange, almost floating, as systems begin relaxing after hours of tension. Your muscles are discovering injuries and strains they ignored during the walk. Your calves ache, your lower back is stiff, your shoulders complain about the weight they've been carrying. This delayed pain is normal, the body's way of reporting damage once the immediate crisis has passed and there's bandwidth available for non-critical complaints. The woman brings you a bowl of soup, rich, fatty, with chunks of meat and root vegetables. Reindeer, she says, answering your unasked question. From last month's slaughter. Eat slowly. You obey, spooning the soup carefully into your mouth, letting the fat coat your tongue, the warmth spreading through your chest. Fat is crucial in Arctic diets. It's calorie-dense, it helps your body maintain temperature, it provides the building blocks for hormone production and cell membrane repair. The Saka diet traditionally includes far more fat than Western nutritional guidelines recommend, but those guidelines were developed for temperate climates where survival doesn't depend on maintaining body temperature against a minus 71 degrees Celsius environment. As you eat, you listen to the room's conversation. The two young men are discussing snowmobile repairs in rapid Saka that you can only partially follow. The elderly man is talking to the child about proper knot tying technique for fishing nets, demonstrating with patient repetition. The woman moves between tasks, checking the stove, refilling tea, organizing gear that's drying near the warmth, maintaining the household with practiced efficiency. This is what human habitation looks like in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. People performing ordinary tasks in extraordinary conditions, maintaining life and culture and continuity despite an environment that would kill them within hours if their shelter and fire failed. Your mind, freed from survival imperatives, begins processing the day's experience. 8 hours of walking through temperatures cold enough to freeze flesh solid in minutes, through landscapes that have killed countless people, through darkness and isolation and physical extremity. And you made it. You're here, safe, warm, eating hot food and drinking sweet tea. The relief is profound but also complicated by awareness that this was just one walk, one day, and that people do this regularly, not as adventure but as life, traveling between settlements, checking trap lines, visiting relatives, living full human existences in conditions that seem impossible. The cold outside continues. The wind has picked up. You can hear it now, whistling around the building's edges, finding gaps and exploiting them. A constant reminder that the shelter is just a thin barrier between life and death, that warmth is maintained only through constant effort and vigilance. But inside, for now, there's heat and food and human company. For now, you're alive and safe. For now, that's enough. The evening settles into a comfortable rhythm, the kind of routine that must play out thousands of times across Yakutia during the long winter months. People gathered around heat sources, performing small tasks, sharing space and warmth and the quiet companionship that comes from collective survival. You've finished your soup and are working on a second bowl because your body is screaming for calories, demanding fuel to rebuild depleted reserves and repair the microscopic damage that 8 hours of extreme cold exposure inevitably causes. The woman, her name is Sardana, you've learned, keeps refilling your tea without being asked, an attentiveness that speaks to deep understanding of what travelers need after extended cold exposure. Your body is going through a complex recovery process that will continue for hours. Core temperature is slowly rising, approaching normal ranges, but this creates its own challenges. As you warm, your peripheral blood vessels dilate, pulling warm blood away from your core toward your extremities. This is why people who are rescued from hypothermia sometimes die during rewarming. The sudden redistribution of cold blood from extremities back to the core can cause fatal cardiac arrhythmias. You're nowhere near that extreme, but you can feel the process happening. Waves of warmth and chill alternating as your circulatory system recalibrates. Occasional shivers as your body fine-tunes its temperature management. The elderly man, Nikolai, he's called, probably 70 years old, but with the kind of weathered timelessness that makes precise age guessing impossible, has finished with his fishing nets and is now telling stories. You catch fragments even with your limited sake. Tales of winter hunts, of reindeer migrations, of the time a wolf pack surrounded his camp and he had to keep fires burning for 3 days straight until they finally wandered off. These stories serve multiple purposes. They're entertainment, obviously, breaking the monotony of winter evenings. But they're also instruction, passing down survival knowledge through narrative, teaching the child and anyone else listening how to read animal behavior, how to manage fire, how to stay calm when surrounded by predators. The Saka oral tradition has preserved survival knowledge for millennia this way, encoding practical information in memorable stories that get retold generation after generation. The two young men have abandoned their card game and are now maintaining their snowmobiles, working on engines they've brought inside to keep warm enough to work on. Modern technology and ancient conditions create interesting adaptations. Snowmobiles have become essential for winter travel, but they require constant maintenance in extreme cold. Fuel needs additives to prevent gelling. Oil needs to be special low-temperature formulations. Batteries need to be brought inside overnight or they'll freeze and crack. Every piece of technology that works effortlessly in temperate climates becomes a maintenance challenge in Yakutia, requiring constant attention and specialized knowledge. You're warm enough now that you're starting to notice discomforts you ignored earlier. Your skin itches where cold damaged surface capillaries. Your lips are cracked and painful. Your knuckles are raw from the constant friction of heavy mittens. Your feet, despite being warm and apparently undamaged, ache with a deep, bone-level soreness that suggests you pushed them harder than they appreciated. These are all minor injuries, the kind that will heal in days, but they're reminders of what you put your body through. Each winter journey adds small damages that accumulate over time, which is why long-term Arctic residents often develop chronic issues, joint problems, circulation issues, persistent cold sensitivity, that are the cost of living at the edge of human habitability. Sardana has brought out materials for tomorrow's travel preparation. She's showing you fresh dried grass for your boots, demonstrating how to pack it correctly. Not too tight, which would compress and lose insulating value, but not too loose, which would allow it to shift and create pressure points. She's checking your gear with a critical eye, noting the wear patterns on your boots where the leather is beginning to crack, the thin spots in your wool layer where friction has abraded the fibers. You need repairs, she says matter-of-factly. Tomorrow you rest here, I fix. Next day you travel. The presumption that you'll stay another day is both surprising and completely reasonable. You're exhausted, your gear needs maintenance, and traveling immediately after an 8-hour winter journey would be foolish. The Saka approach to winter travel includes mandatory rest periods, recognition that pushing too hard leads to mistakes that lead to death. Western cultures often celebrate relentless pushing through hardship, but the Saka have learned through bitter experience that survival requires knowing when to stop, when to rest, when to choose safety over progress. The child, a girl named Adelina, has finished her homework and is now practicing traditional Saka throat singing, producing those remarkable dual-tone vocalizations that sound like two voices emerging from one throat. This is Toyuk, a singing style that developed in isolation from similar techniques in Mongolia and Tuva, though historians still argue whether there was ancient contact between these cultures or whether throat singing is a convergent solution that multiple Arctic peoples discovered independently. The sound is haunting, otherworldly, perfectly suited to these long winter nights. Adelina is clearly still learning. Her technique breaks occasionally, the second tone wavering and disappearing, but she's persistent, repeating phrases until they emerge correctly. Night deepens outside. The wind strengthens, and you can hear snow being driven against the building's walls, that distinctive hiss and rattle of wind-blown ice crystals. The temperature outside has probably dropped further. Nighttime temperatures in Yakutian winter can bottom out at -80 degrees Celsius or even lower, though at those extremes, the difference between -71 degrees Celsius and -80 degrees Celsius is largely academic. Both will kill you quickly if you're unprotected. The shelter, with its thick log walls and constant stove heat, maintains its steady 15 degrees Celsius, a bubble of survivable temperature maintained against impossible odds. Nikolai has moved on to a different kind of story now, cosmology, the traditional Saka understanding of how the world works. He speaks of the upper world where benevolent spirits dwell, the middle world where humans and animals live, and the lower world where hostile spirits reside. He describes how winter is the time when the lower world grows stronger, when darkness and cold serve as pathways for malevolent forces, and how humans must maintain fires and lights and warmth not just for physical survival, but for spiritual protection. Modern science would explain the psychological need for light and warmth during extreme cold in terms of seasonal affective disorder and dopamine regulation, but the practical result is the same. Maintaining bright, warm living spaces during Arctic winter is crucial for mental health and survival. The conversation turns to recent news. A supply plane crashed last month due to mechanical failure in extreme cold, killing all aboard. A child in a distant village died from influenza that developed into pneumonia. A successful wolf hunt that will provide furs for trading. These updates are delivered matter-of-factly, without excessive emotion, a recitation of facts that comprises the reality of winter life. Death is common enough to be unremarkable, survival ordinary enough to not warrant celebration. This emotional restraint might seem cold to outsiders, but it's adaptive. Excessive emotional investment in every tragedy would be psychologically unsustainable in an environment where tragedy is statistically common. Your eyelids are growing heavy. The combination of warmth, food, and exhaustion is pushing you towards sleep. Sardana notices and gestures toward your assigned sleeping platform. Rest now. Tomorrow we talk more. You nod gratefully and move to the platform, which is covered with reindeer hides and thick wool blankets. The platform is still elevated off the floor, away from the cold air that settles at ground level even inside heated spaces. This is another subtle adaptation. Sleeping on the floor in Arctic conditions means sleeping in the coldest air layer, while elevated sleeping platforms keep you in warmer strata. You arrange yourself on the platform, pulling blankets over your tired body, and allow yourself to relax fully for the first time in hours. The stove radiates steady warmth. The wind howls outside, safely beyond the walls. Human voices murmur in conversation, a comforting background sound. Your body, given permission, begins the serious work of recovery, rebuilding damaged tissue, rebalancing disrupted systems, processing stress hormones, consolidating the day's experiences into memory. Sleep comes quickly, pulling you down into darkness that's warm and safe, unlike the frozen darkness you walked through for 8 hours. Your last conscious thought is amazement, not at your own achievement, but at the people who do this regularly, who've built lives and families and entire cultures in conditions that should be uninhabitable. The Saka, the Evenk, the countless others who've thrived for millennia at temperatures that would kill most humans within hours. They're not superhuman, just differently adapted, possessing knowledge and techniques and cultural frameworks that make the impossible routine. Dreams come, fragmented and strange. You're walking through endless white forests where trees whisper in voices you almost understand. You're warm and cold simultaneously, standing at the boundary between temperatures, feeling both states without contradiction. You're speaking Saka fluently, understanding everything, part of a conversation that stretches back through generations. These are the dreams of boundary crossing, of transformation, of standing between worlds and states and understandings. Outside, the Yakutian night continues its frozen vigil. Stars will across the sky with indifferent beauty. The temperature drops further, testing the limits of cold, approaching absolute extremities of what atmospheric conditions can produce at sea level on Earth. Animals sleep in burrows and nests, their metabolisms slowed to near hibernation. The forest stands silent and crystalline, every branch laden with frost, every surface transformed into art by cold's patient sculpting. And inside the shelter, humans maintain their small warm space, their bubble of survival carved from hostile conditions through knowledge and effort and the accumulated wisdom of centuries. The stove burns steadily, consuming wood, producing heat, keeping the cold at bay. This is what civilization looks like at its most fundamental. Not cities or technology or complex institutions, but people gathered around fire, sharing warmth and food and stories, maintaining life in the face of environmental extremity. The night passes, your body heals, the cold outside remains, patient and permanent, the defining fact of life in Yakutia. But for now, for this night, you're safe. You've walked through minus 71 degrees Celsius and survived. You've experienced something that most humans will never experience. Pushed your body and mind to limits you didn't know existed. And tomorrow you'll wake up in warmth, eat breakfast, repair your gear, and prepare to do it again. Because this is what survival looks like in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. Not a single heroic achievement, but a sustained practice, a way of living that accommodates extremity and finds humanity and warmth and meaning even in conditions that seem to preclude all three. The wind outside sings its ice crystal song. The fire crackles softly. Human breathing creates a rhythm of life continuing, persisting, enduring. And in the space between waking and sleeping, between warmth and cold, between impossibility and reality, you rest. A temporary visitor to a permanent landscape, carrying away memories of frozen forests and singing snow and the knowledge that humans can adapt to almost anything if we're clever enough, stubborn enough, and willing to learn from those who've walked these frozen paths before us. Sweet dreams, traveler. Tomorrow brings new cold, new challenges, new journeys. But tonight, you're warm. Tonight, you're safe. Tonight, in the heart of winter's darkest grip, you found shelter and survived to tell the tale.